One of the greatest finds of Akkadian texts was the ruins of a library assembled in Nineveh by Ashurbanipal. Layard and his colleagues carted away from that site 25,000 tablets, many of which were described by the ancient scribes as copies of olden texts. A group of 23 tablets ended with the statement, 23rd tablet, language of Sumer not changed. Another text bore the enigmatic statement by Ashurbanipal himself. The god of scribes has bestowed on me the gift of the knowledge of his art. I have been initiated into the secrets of writing. I can even read the intricate tablets in Sumerian. I understand the enigmatic words in the stone carvings from the days before the flood. The fact that Ashurbanipal claimed to be able to read complicated Sumerian tablets and interpret the words written on them from the days before the flood only added to the mystery. However, in January 1869, Jules Oppert proposed to the French Society of Numismatics and Archaeology that the existence of a pre-Akkadian language and people be acknowledged. He suggested that the people be dubbed Sumerians and the area Sumer, because the early kings of Mesopotamia had declared their legitimacy by accepting the title King of Sumer and Akkad. Oppert was correct, with the exception of mispronouncing the name. It should have been Shumer, not Sumer. Sumer was not a mystery, far-away region, but the ancient term for southern Mesopotamia, as the Book of Genesis had clearly stated. The land of Shinar included the royal towns of Babylon, Akkad, and Erech. Shinar was Sumer's biblical name. The floodgates were released once the scholars accepted these results. They soon concluded that tablets with long columns of words were Akkadian Sumerian lexicons and dictionaries, constructed in Assyria and Babylonia for their own study of Sumerian, their earliest written language. We would still be a long way from being able to understand Sumerian without these old dictionaries. With their assistance, a tremendous literary and cultural treasure trove became available. It was also discovered that the Sumerian script, which was originally pictographic and carved in stone and vertical columns, was later turned horizontally and stylized for wedge writing on Slavkite tablets to become the cuneiform writing used by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and other Near Eastern nations. The discovery of the Sumerian language and script, as well as knowledge that Sumerians and their culture were the cradle of Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian achievements, prompted archaeologists to seek southern Mesopotamia. All of the evidence now pointed to the existence of the beginning. French archaeologists began the first substantial excavation of a Sumerian site in 1877, and the results of this single site were so comprehensive that others continued to dig there until 1933 without finishing the work. The site, known to the locals as Taloh Mound, was discovered to be an early Sumerian metropolis, the Lagash, whose conquest Sargon of Akkad had boasted about. It was really a royal city, and its kings bore the same title as Sargon, except it was written in Sumerian, Ansi, righteous ruler. Their dynasty lasted about 650 years, beginning around 2900 BCE. During this time, Lagash was ruled by 43 Ansis, all of whose names, lineages, and reign lengths were meticulously recorded. These Sumerian rulers could only assume the throne with the agreement of the gods, according to an Ensi named Eannatum, who left an inscription on a clay brick. He also reported the conquest of another city, demonstrating the presence of other Sumerian city-states around the start of the 3rd millennium BCE. Entemena, Eannatum's successor, wrote of erecting a temple and embellishing it with gold and silver, as well as creating gardens and extending brick-lined wells. He spoke of constructing a castle with watchtowers and mooring facilities. Gudea was one of Lagash's more well-known monarchs. He commissioned a significant number of statuettes depicting himself in a votive attitude, praying to his gods. This was no ruse. Gudea had devoted himself to the worship of Ningrisu, his main deity, as well as the construction and reconstruction of temples. In his search for exquisite building materials, he acquired items from around the ancient world. Gudea imported precious metals such as gold from Africa and Anatolia, copper from the Zagros range, silver from the Taurus mountains. For temple and building materials, he sourced cedars from Lebanon, other rare woods from Ararat, diorite and carnelian from Egypt and Ethiopia, other materials from lands as yet to be identified by scholars. When Moses built a residence in the desert for the Lord God, he followed the Lord's explicit instructions to the letter. After the Lord had given him insight, King Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem. A person who had the appearance of bronze and held in his hand a flaxen string and measuring rod showed the prophet Ezekiel exceedingly precise designs for the second temple in a godly vision. Ur-Nammu, the ruler of Ur, described how his deity gave him a measuring rod and rolled string for the project after commanding him to build a temple for him and providing him the necessary instructions. Even Gudea made the same allegation 1,200 years before Moses. The instructions were delivered to him in a vision, which he documented in one continuous inscription. A man that shone like heaven, by whose side stood a divine bird, commanded me to build his temple. This man, who from the crown on his head was obviously a god, was later identified as the god Ningirsu. With him was a goddess who held the tablet on her favorable star in the heavens. Her other hand held a holy stylus, with which she indicated to Gudea the favorable planet. The third man, also a god, held in his hands a tablet of precious stone, the plan of a temple it contained. Gudea is depicted seated with the tablet on his knees in one of his statues. Divine painting is clearly visible on the tablet. Gudea, as wise as he was perplexed by these architectural directions, so he sought out the help of the goddess who could decipher divine messages. She went through the significance of the instructions, the dimensions of the plan, and the size and shapes of the bricks that would be utilized with him. Gudea then hired a male diviner, maker of decisions, and a female searcher of secrets to find the location where the god wanted his temple to be built on the city's outskirts. He then enlisted the help of over 200,000 workers for the construction project. Gudea's perplexity is understandable, as the simple-looking floor plan was meant to provide him with all the knowledge he needed to construct a sophisticated ziggurat that rose in 7 stages. Belarbek was able to comprehend at least some of the divine architectural instructions when writing in Der Alte Orient in 1900. Even on the partially damaged statue, the ancient artwork is accompanied at the top by groups of vertical lines whose number decreases as the distance between them increases. It appears the divine architects were able to provide complete directions for the construction of a 7-stage, high-rise temple using just a single floor plan and 7 different scales. While it has been said war stimulates man to scientific and material achievements, temple construction appears to have propelled the people and their rulers to higher technological achievements in ancient Sumer. The ability to carry out major construction work according to architectural plans, to organize and feed a large labor force, to flatten land and raise mounds, to mold bricks and transport stones, to bring rare metals and other materials from afar, to cast metal and shape utensils and ornaments, all speaks of high civilization, which was already in full bloom in the 3rd millennium BCE. Even the most magnificent Sumerian temples were only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the magnitude and richness of the material achievements of the world's first great civilization. Sumerian should be attributed with the creation of printing, in addition to the invention and development of writing, without which a high civilization would not have been possible. Before Johann Gutenberg developed printing by employing movable type, Sumerian scribes employed ready-made type of various pictographic signs, which they used similarly to how we today use rubber stamps, to impress the required sequence of signs in wet clay. They also devised the cylinder seal, which is the predecessor of our rotating presses. It was a little cylinder made of exceptionally hard stone, to which the phrase or design had been etched in reverse. When the seal was rolled over wet clay, the imprint left a positive impression. The seal might also be used to verify the legitimacy of documents by making a new impression and comparing it to the old impression on the document. Many Sumerian and Mesopotamian holy records dealt with mundane duties like recording crops, measuring fields, and calculating prices, rather than holy or spiritual. Without a parallel advanced mathematical system, no high civilization would have been feasible. The Sumerian system, known as sexagesimal, created the foundation figure 60 by combining the mundane 10 with the celestial 6. This system is preferable to our current one in certain ways, and is unquestionably superior to the subsequent Greek and Roman systems in others. It allowed Sumerians to divide numbers into fractions, multiply them by millions, as well as compute roots and elevate numbers to multiple powers. It's not only the first known mathematical system, but also gave us the concept of place numbers. Just as 2 might represent 2 or 20 or 200 in the decimal system, depending on the digit's place, in Sumerian, 2 could signify 2 or 120, 2 times 60, and so on, depending on the place. The 360-degree circle, the foot and its 12 inches, the dozen as a unit, are only a few instances of Sumerian mathematics that have survived into our times. Their simultaneous successes in astronomy, construction of a calendar, and other mathematical celestial triumphs will be examined in greater depth in subsequent videos. If you find this fascinating, please hit the like button. If you're not already, go ahead and subscribe. Click the bell so you'll be notified whenever we put out more great videos like this one. Sumerian and Mesopotamian life was based on clay, just as our own economic and social structure, our books, court and tax records, commercial contracts, marriage licenses, and so on, is based on paper. Temples, courts, and trading houses contained tablets of wet clay on which scribes might inscribe decisions, agreements, letters, or compute prices, wages, the area of a field, or the number of bricks needed in a construction. Clay is also an important raw material for making everyday items, as well as containers for storing and transporting commodities. It was also used to manufacture bricks, which enabled the construction of residences for common people, palaces for the rulers, and majestic temples for the gods. Reinforcing and baking are two technological advances credited to the Sumerians that allowed all clay objects to combine lightness with tensile strength. Reinforced concrete, an exceedingly powerful building material, can be made by pouring cement into molds holding iron rods, as was found by modern builders. But long before the Sumerians gave their bricks enormous strength by mixing wet clay with chopped reeds, or straw. They also recognized that baking clay products in a kiln give them a tensile strength and durability. These technological advancements enabled the world's first high-rise buildings and archways, as well as long-lasting ceramic products. The advent of the kiln, a furnace that could reach high but controlled temperatures without including polluting items such as dust or ashes into the product, paved the way for an even larger technological leap, the Age of Metals. Around 6000 BCE, it's thought that man learned he could hammer soft stones, naturally occurring nuggets of gold, copper, and silver compounds, into useful or pleasing shapes. The first hammer-metalled items were discovered in the Zagros and Taurus mountain highlands. In the Near East, the supply of local copper was quickly exhausted and the miner had to turn to ores, according to R.J. Forbes, in the birthplace of Old World metallurgy. This necessitated the knowledge and skill to locate and collect ores, crush them, and then smelt and purify them, procedures that could not have been possible without the use of kiln-type furnaces and other modern technologies. The capacity to mix copper with other metals was soon added to the art of metallurgy, culminating in bronze, a castable, hard but malleable metal. Our first metallurgical age, the Bronze Age, was also a Mesopotamian contribution to modern civilization. Metals trade accounted for a large portion of ancient commerce. It was also the foundation for the formation of banking and the first monies, the silver shekel, weighted ingot, in Mesopotamia. The numerous types of metals and alloys for which Sumerian Akkadian names have been discovered, as well as the rich technological terminology, attest to ancient Mesopotamia's high degree of metallurgy. For a long time, this perplexed historians because Sumer was bereft of metal ores, despite the fact that metallurgy began there. Energy is the answer. Without enough fuel to heat the kilns, crucibles, and furnaces, smelting, refining, and alloying, as well as casting, would be impossible. We know that many times ovens were set up in special areas where, at the right time of year, fierce winds would blow through, allowing the kilns to reach temperatures not usually attainable. Mesopotamia may have been devoid of ores, but it was awash in fuels. As a result, the ores were transported to the fuels, which explains why many early inscriptions mention the transport of metal ore from afar. Bitumens and asphalts, petroleum compounds that naturally crept to the surface in many parts of Mesopotamia, were the fuels that propelled Sumer to technological supremacy. From the beginning to the end of the Roman era, R.J. Forbes, Bitumen and Petroleum in Antiquity, demonstrates that the ancient world's primary source of fuel was Mesopotamia's surface deposits. He concludes the technological usage of these petroleum compounds began in Sumer around 3500 BCE, and that Sumerian knowledge of the fuels and their qualities was higher than that of later civilizations. The Sumerian usage of petroleum compounds was so widespread, not just as fuel, but also as a road-building material, waterproofing, caulking, painting, cementing, and molding, that researchers discovered ancient Ur buried in a mound, nicknamed Mound of Bitumen, by nearby Arabs. According to Forbes, every genus and variation of bituminous compounds found in Mesopotamia had terms in Sumerian. Indeed, the name of bituminous and petroleum materials in various languages, Akkadian, Hebrew, Egypt, Coptic, Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit, can all be traced back to Sumerian origins. For example, the most frequent term for petroleum, naphtha, comes from napatu, flaring stones. Petroleum products were also essential to Sumerian advanced chemistry. We can measure Sumerian expertise by the diversity of paints and pigments employed, as well as procedures like glazing, as well as the astonishing artificial fabrication of semi-precious stones, including a substitute for the highly sought-after lapis lazuli. Bitumens were also utilized in Sumerian medicine, another sector with exceptionally high standards. Hundreds of Akkadian manuscripts have been discovered, many of which use Sumerian medical terms and phrases, indicating that all Mesopotamian medicine has a Sumerian basis. A medical section was incorporated in Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh. There were 3 categories. Sections of early legal codes dealt with fees payable to surgeons for successful surgeries, as well as penalties to be enforced in the event of failure. If a surgeon used a lancet to open a patient's temple and accidentally destroyed the patient's eye, he would lose his hand. Some skeletons discovered in Mesopotamian burials had clear signs of brain surgery. A partially broken medical book describes the surgical removal of a shadow covering a man's eye, most likely a cataract. Another text references the use of a cutting instrument, saying, "If the sickness has reached the inner surface of the bone, you shall scrape and remove." In Sumerian times, sick people had the option of seeing an Azu, water physician, or an Iazu, oil physician. Lulu the doctor, according to a roughly 5,000-year-old tablet discovered in Ur, is a medical practitioner. Veterinarians were also present, referred to as doctors of oxen or doctors of asses. On a very early cylinder seal discovered at Lagash, that belonged to Ulagaldina, the doctor, a pair of surgical tongs is portrayed. The serpent on a tree, which is still a symbol of medicine, is also depicted on the seal. A midwife's equipment for cutting the umbilical cord is often commonly represented on cylinder seals. Diagnoses and prescriptions are discussed in Sumerian medical books. They prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Sumerian physician did not use magic or sorcery. Cleaning and washing were suggested, as well as soaking in hot water and mineral solvent baths, using vegetable derivatives, and rubbing with petroleum compounds. Plant and mineral-based medicines were combined with liquids or solvents appropriate for the application procedure. The powders were blended into wine, beer, or honey if taken by mouth. They were mixed with plant or vegetable oils if poured via the rectum or administered as an enema. Alcohol, which is used in surgical disinfection and as a foundation for many treatments, came to us through the Arabic word kol, which is derived from the Akkadian kuhulu. Medicine was taught in medical colleges using clay models of human organs. Temple rites required complex dissections of sacrificial animals, only a step removed from equivalent understanding of human anatomy. For the Sumerians, anatomy must have been a sophisticated science. Several cylinder seals and clay tablets represent humans laying on a surgical table, surrounded by teams of gods or people. The Sumerians and their predecessors in Mesopotamia were preoccupied with matters of life, sickness, and death, according to epics and other heroic works. Gilgamesh, a king of Erech, was on the lookout for the tree of life, or a mineral or stone that might grant endless youth. There were additional mentions of attempts to resuscitate the dead, particularly if they were gods. Upon the corpse hung from the pole, they directed the pulse and the radiance, 60 times the water of life, 60 times the food of life they sprinkled upon it, and Inanna arose. A scene of medical treatment illustrated on a cylinder seal dating from the dawn of Sumerian civilization strongly suggests that radioactive materials were understood and employed to treat specific disorders. It clearly depicts a man resting on a special bed, his face hidden behind a mask, and he is being exposed to some form of radiation. Were there any ultramodern methods known and used in such revival attempts about which we can only speculate? If you have friends interested in historical mysteries, share this video with them. It really helps us out a lot.